Good morning. The date is August 4th, 2023. My name is Glenn Wolushka, your moderator and host, Voice of the West and Independent Media Canada, broadcasting to you today, as always, from off-grid somewhere in the Monashee. We're going to change our format a little bit. Things have taken a dramatic turn this last few months, and it's becoming more and more apparent that we independent citizen journalists and broadcasters are the ones that are going to have to introduce the general public to a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, a lot of events that are not being covered by traditional media, particularly mainstream media in Canada, after the federal government has passed bills C-11 and C-18, which are not only restricting a lot of independent journalism, but also causing a little bit of trouble south of the border, where it turns out that people like Google and Facebook aren't particularly happy that the federal government wants them to pay to carry Canadian content. So we're in an interesting time, and it's very important that those of us that care about such things, that care about Canada, that care about the freedoms, the liberties, some of which should be inalienable, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, are particularly important ones that have been addressed over the past couple of years because of a lot of issues that have been going on. A lot of things the government did, the Freedom Convoy, shut down bank accounts, suspended, all sorts of things have happened that are not particularly great. And those of us that are citizen journalists or independent journalists that are doing these kinds of broadcasts, I think are going to become the preferred journalist source for a lot of individuals as time goes on. I particularly am dedicated to this. We have a Voice of the West channel and an independent media channel on YouTube as well as Facebook, or pardon me, not as well as Facebook. I won't use Facebook. As well as Rumble. So YouTube and Rumble are the two places where we're normally going to do this kind of broadcasting. We'll also do some things on a live basis as time goes on. But I was very fortunate this last couple of weeks to be introduced to a gentleman who set up a radio station in Salmon Arm, British Columbia, a few years past. He's an ex-airplane controller, airport controller. Those things that fly in the sky, he controls them. And he is going to join us on a lot of these podcasts. And on a collaborative basis, hopefully it's going to be a little more interesting than just listening to one person himself talk. Because while that's useful, it's not ideal. Now, as you can see, there's a few of us in the studio. Mickey and Elon the elephant, because you know what, whether people want to admit it or not, there's usually an elephant in the room. Well, we have an elephant in the room. It's Elon. Meet Elon. He will come into play once and again, and say hi, Elon.
Oh.
So there we go. That's Elon. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Steve to introduce himself, and we'll find out a bit more about Steve. We'll find out kind of why he's decided to join this particular little endeavor, and we're going to get on with it. So here we are, Steve Corrie.
Well, good. I guess we're still in the morning. Good morning, Glenn. I call myself Mr. C, and the reason I'm here is because I'm very interested in what you're doing. Technically, you're very advanced, but it's my I call myself a bit of a critical thinker. Got myself in a lot of trouble over the past, but you're right. I co-founded with another Steve, actually, that community radio station in Salmon Arm. My past experiences, I was an air traffic controller. Moved around a bit. Everybody asked me, where did you control? Well, I started out Quebec City, Montreal, Vancouver. Then I went and taught for 10 years, and then I went to Ottawa, of all places. Before that, I was trained in the Air Force as a navigator, so aviation is a bit of my. But really, for what you, the observer, the listener, are probably interested in is, as Glenn says, independent media. And my true interest in that probably started in the 90s, but I remember the Tyee, Tyee, online newspaper coming into existence in the early part of the 21st century. But politics, current events are interesting, and I believe where Glenn is right on, it's critical. It's actually critical that the public be informed. Now, I'm not saying that we can truly inform you, but we can bring you a perspective. Each individual brings his own perspective, and we can touch on so many different issues where Glenn mentioned it. The mainstream media, the so-called legacy media, doesn't touch on it for all kinds of reasons. It's not bleeding, and you know the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. And so they're presenting to the public a lot of what I call bland, very bland fluff. And what we would like to do, and I think Glenn is right on, we would like to present some content, some information, not necessarily the truth. Who knows what is really the truth? You can call it misinformation. You can call it disinformation. You can call it what you want. This is our opinions, our media. So I want to thank Glenn for what he's doing, because I think it's, as I said, critical. It's important that we at least try to present something to the public. So back to you, Glenn. You're the guy in control.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. The importance of balance in media is critical. And unfortunately, what we've seen from the mainstream media the last few years is them presenting a narrative. And I've had firsthand experience where I've been at live events with some of the broadcast crews from Global News, from CBC, from CTV, and their cameras, my cameras, are filming the same event, but somehow when they get back to the studio, the narrative that they're providing was totally different from what I personally experienced. And that's because the mainstream media is no longer independent. Once you start taking money from the government, you start taking money from special interest groups, you are no longer the fourth estate that is there to hold those in power to account. So we're going to try to provide that balance, and shamelessly, I'm going to tell you right now that we have obviously our own biases. They're going to be very easy to recognize, and I have no idea whether Steve's biases are as deep and as dramatic as mine. Maybe they're worse. Who knows? We're going to find out. It's going to be kind of a fun thing, because we don't know where that's going to go. But what I do know is that it's important that we get the message out. There are a huge number of topical issues that have to be addressed. This last week alone, while most of the mainstream media was probably falling all over themselves, delirious that, Justin and Sophie Trudeau are getting divorced, there's real issues like 4 gentlemen in Coutts, Alberta, who've been incarcerated for over 540 days now without trial, based on allegations. And if the allegations are true, I guess they deserve jail time. However, if this turns out to be a political incarceration, because these gentlemen embarrassed the government during the times of the Freedom Convoy, then we have a serious constitutional issue here in Canada. That's got to be discussed. So that's one of the things that Steve and I are going to talk about. We're going to talk about Tamara Leach, coming to BC, book signing. She's going to be coming sometime in the next couple of weeks. That'll be a topic, obviously, of discussion. Potentially what's going on in the United States, what's going on with the World Economic Forum, what's going on with Agenda 2030, what's going on politically. Why is it that Canadians seem to be so terribly apathetic and we in the West never seem to have our fair say? So there's a tremendous number of issues that we're going to talk about. It's going to be wonderful to be able to do that with somebody who's actually here in studio with me, sometimes remotely. Sometimes we're going to try to be remote and get out to you so we can hear your opinions and your thoughts and your views. There is nothing more important than discussion, dialogue, and debate when it comes to the serious issues that are addressing us all at this point in time. And we have to be able to deal with these things on a critical thinking, informed basis. So again, I'm going to turn it back to to Steve to see if he's got a couple of last thoughts. And we're going to probably wrap this one up today and get it out to you and just tell you that we want you to keep apprised. We're going to let you know on Twitter. We're going to let you know on whatever social media sites we have available, but look for us on rumble.com/voice of the West and rumble.com/IamCanada. And it'll also be on YouTube under Voice of the West and on YouTube under Independent Media Canada. So again, back to you, Steve.
Well, Glenn, I'm really impressed. There's a whole bunch of things that you said there, and my old brain these days can't record them all, but I'm very pleased because I think, one, you have available to you that you have created a studio and the technology to produce some very well done, I think, from what I've seen so far, broadcast quality reporting, and that includes, as you said, remote. We can sometimes go remote. So this kind of independent citizen journalism that you are producing, I hail you. I laud your efforts and your experience, and I think I'm very pleased. I could even say that I'm excited, but the mainstream media likes to use that word. Oh, I'm so excited. At my age, I don't get that excited that easy, but I am very pleased to be involved in this effort. And you talked about narrative. There are so many things out there that I believe need to be clarified. I'm not saying that we can do it all by ourselves, but we can certainly make a stab at it. And at the very least, get a dialogue going and try and address this lack of information, not narrative. The mainstream media, they have their narrative, and you can see it. It's there for all to see. So thank you, Glenn, for inviting me and for what you're doing, because I think it's vitally important to our country at this point. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for filling in people with regards to sort of what the plan is and where we're going to go forward. And it's going to start happening on a pretty timely basis. So this is kind of the introductory. Again, we think that citizen journalism, we think that independent journalism is the focus. We're highly behind what Elon Musk has done with X. Used to be Twitter, but it's now X for those of you that haven't caught up yet. Because I'll bet the mainstream media hasn't even talked about that at this point in time. But the importance of free speech cannot be overstated. You know, I've heard a number of people talk about, you know, is it important, is it not important? Well, I've also heard people that are very, very wise say that you can take away all of my rights and freedoms, but as long as I have freedom of speech, I have the ability and the capacity to regain them. And I think that's an important thing for people to think about. Our government is totally offside when it comes to trying to restrict or regulate free speech from Canadian citizens through CRTC or any other form. We have the right, we have the inalienable right to freedom of speech, to freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, numerous freedoms that should not be regulated or controlled by government. You know, we're going to get into a lot of issues. We're going to get into what happened with COVID. We're going to get into what's happening with current legislation. We're going to get to the point where we're dealing with issues that matter to people. You know, you and me, and what we're trying to do, you know, just to augment what Steve said, is we're going to try to make sure that you are an informed listener and viewer, that you have enough factual information. We're going to point you in the right direction. There are certain groups, there are certain individuals that we're going to encourage you to follow. Like Eva Chipiuk said, who's one of the lawyers that was involved with the Freedom Convoy hearings. She's incredibly articulate, wonderful lawyer out of Alberta, and she said that the problem we have on the right is that we have all sorts of people who are strong in their beliefs and in their principles, but we're kind of hard to organize. We're kind of hard to, it's like herding cats, you know. So we have to find a way to take all of these freedom-related groups, all of these groups that are worried about constitutional issues, charter issues, and the like, and find a way to have a common meeting place, a common ground where we can express ourselves collectively, because in this particular case, we have a big presence working against us, the mainstream media colluding with the federal government, colluding with governments, with World Economic Forum, with the United Nations Agenda 2030, and they're organized, and that's the tough thing when you're on the right. You're real hard to organize, right? But we have to get there, and if we're not going to get there, it's going to take an awful lot longer for us to succeed. I firmly believe that the pendulum will swing back and we will see common sense regained, but the rights of the individual have been smashed by governments, and particularly our own Canadian government. We have to assert our rights, and guess what? We have the power to do that, but we have to have an informed electorate, an informed public that is able to understand what's going on, appreciate that a lot of the things that are coming from bureaucracy and the governments are not necessarily on our own best interests, and we have to fix it. We got to fix what's broke.
Yeah.
So again, today we are dealing with our introductory broadcast, videocast, and we're going to get back to you shortly with some key issues that we think are particularly important. Look for us on Twitter, Voice of the West on Twitter, at Voice of the West, and look for us in some social media presences that are maybe local, but we do have both, like I said before, our YouTube and our Rumble channels. We encourage you to see what kind of content we've already provided, but we're going to get a lot more serious here as time goes on. Again, Glenn Waleska, moderator and host, Voice of the West, broadcasting to you today, off-grid, somewhere in the Monashee, August 4th, 2023. You have a great one.